We've got a good crowd. I'm glad to see so many familiar faces. Today, we're going to talk about how does the county come up with a revenue source? How does the county come about raising funds to take care of roads? So a proposed vehicle registration fee is being discussed, and today Chair Bernard is going to share with us a little bit about that and introduce our speakers.
So I'm going to have a walk around mic.
Or
well,
you can use this one.
I'll use that one. We'll use this for something else.
I'll use that for the questions.
All right. Well, first I want to thank you all for coming. The entire commission would be here in support of our folks, except we have a diversity conference today, and both Paul and I left early to come to this, and we actually had a very good speaker. But I'm glad you came. I'm Jim Bernard. I'm the chair of the commission, and Paul Savas, commissioner, and Martha Schrader and Sonia Fisher and Ken Hubbardston are still at the conference. We've been talking about the need for funding transportation for many years, probably 20. We've tried gas tax, I believe, 6 times, and it failed. Some communities did enact gas tax before the legislature changed the rule that everyone has to vote on it. HB 2017 was a great start, but it still does not produce enough funds, the funds we need to construct capital projects, to relieve congestion, improve safety, or to maintain local roads throughout the county. 1,400 miles of roads throughout the county. We have more roads in this county than I believe any other county has in the state of Oregon. That's why we're talking seriously, looking at the possibility of approving an ordinance for local, county-wide vehicle registration fee. I believe it's the responsibility for us to protect our assets. Today, we have 3 people from our Transportation Development Department to share information about this vital issue. Dan Johnson, the director. Mike Besner, Assistant Director for Transportation, and Deidre Landon, Administrative Service Manager. So enjoy your lunch, listen to the presentation, ask questions, and share your comments and ideas. And if you share in our belief in the need for local funding to keep our transportation system strong, let us know in writing, letter or email, or in person at a Board of County Commissioner board meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Johnson.
I feel kind of like Tony Robbins kind of running in from the side and all that fun stuff. No, not okay. Who said that? Thank you so much. Real quick, I want to thank you again. My name is Dan Johnson. I'm the Director of the Department of Transportation and Development. And we, as the chair so eloquently stated, we are here to have a discussion with you about the vehicle registration fee, or the possibility of a vehicle registration fee. Along the lines of this discussion, we're also going to take some time to kind of honor funding that's already come into place, because there's a couple important words up here continuing the conversation. As the commissioner stated, we started this discussion almost 20 years ago. Discussion around local funding, discussion around how we maintain our roads, which is basically the single biggest public asset we have in and around the county. Discussion today is continuing on that. There has been a change, HB 2017, which has helped a step in the right direction. We're here to share with you kind of the dialogue around what those remaining needs are, share discussions we've had with cities, with business groups, with the Clackamas Coordinating Committee, C4, and educate you kind of about what our next steps are moving forward on this process and this topic. So with that, let's get this show on the road. Whew. It's always that awkward first click that you never think it's going to work. Hey, this is Clackamas County. A couple things that kind of come to mind. There are kind of 4 different things that when I think about when I look at this map. One of which is the size of the county. We forget about how large this county is. It's important to understand scope and scale from Wilsonville all the way over to the western slopes of Mount Hood. Secondly, there's a large percentage that's forest land. Obviously, we've used that area to kind of show the urban area as well, but it's important to kind of know the demographics and the dynamics of the county that we live in. Next, which is interesting to me, is all the water that's on that lovely road map that we have up here. And last but not least, I think there may be more roads that are county-maintained roads on that map than are actual streams in this lovely county. I haven't compared that, but it's an interesting comparison when you actually look at the map itself. So let's look at Clackamas County's road system kind of by the numbers. I'm not going to read all of these obviously off to you, but a couple that bounce up to me. 1,400 road miles Clackamas County maintains within this lovely county of ours. 27,000 traffic signs. 111,000 linear feet of guardrail. 180 bridges and 1 ferry. But you talk about the dynamics of a road system, those are all the various elements. When we talk about road maintenance, we don't simply talk about the paving of the road itself. It's the totality of those systems that provide a road system to the citizens of Clackamas County. Let's talk about road funding. We actually just added this slide because we thought it was good to educate the public, for those of you who may not know. There's 2 columns here. One column is dealing with kind of our general maintenance to the left. Second is to capital to the right. So I'm going to talk briefly about and this is Clackamas County as a whole, where our funding is coming from. On the left, primarily we get our money through the State Highway Fund. It's what we refer as our road fund in Clackamas County. Those dollars are to be directed solely towards road improvements and or road maintenance. Next, timber receipts, secure rural schools money, backfill for the loss of the timber industry or reduction of the timber industry in and around the community. And last but not least is HB 2017, which is new, which we'll, in a couple slides from now, we'll talk more in-depthly about that, what that new funding looks like. That's House Bill 2017. It's a recently approved funding. Thank you, state legislature. We appreciate the help. This continuing the discussion dialogue before was, we use this analogy, kind of jaws of death, when you looked at the inflationary costs and the incurring maintenance costs we were having. That changed the trajectory on that discussion to some extent. It made a great addition to the ability to maintain some of our, not local roads, but arterials and collectors.
Are you taking questions in the middle of this, or we have to wait to the end?
I don't know. How do you want to do it?
I want to ask a question right now.
Feel free.
And I apologize if I'm not hearing it if you said it, but how does
There's a mic I think they're going to ask you to use. I've got 2 up here if you'd like to come up.
Oh, that too. Yeah. Can you explain again how schools help road maintenance?
How schools...
Well, it says schools up there.
Mike, you want to take a look at it?
Hold on. Unless you're going up there.
I'm actually going to call on these folks because they joined me, so I thought I'd share some of the fun.
Should have stayed in the office. Schools have nothing to do with it. It was a federal law that passed. So in the past, the county would get a significant portion of timber cuts in federal lands. And that money went both to general fund and to roads, and it was proportioned differently. And eventually, through the Endangered Species Act with the spotted owl and a few other things, they stopped cutting. And so the federal government passed the Secure Rural Schools Act, I believe it was called. So it's just the name of it. And a lot of the money, some of the money did go to schools, but some of the money went specifically to roads. Clackamas County used to get $4 to $5 million a year from that fund, and now it's pretty much gone.
I think our last secure rural schools was $250,000 for road purposes. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking the question. Capital projects. This is kind of a historical perspective about how we fund capital projects throughout Clackamas County. Federal, state, other, about 46% of the dollars we raise for capital, that's new constructions, comes from those 3 entities. It comes through grants, which we're going to talk a little bit more about here in the following slides. Urban renewal. We had 4 urban renewal districts in Clackamas County. There are pros and cons to that. I know Oregon City's been dove deep into that dialogue about urban renewal. We had 4 districts. 3 of those levies have terminated, and those districts are closing down. Last but not least is our North Clackamas revitalization area. There are pros and cons to the use of that funding source. The pros are the fact that they provide funding directly to specifically blighted areas. The cons are there isn't a lot of flexibility. You can't use those monies outside of those planning areas. They are dictated to be used specifically within those geographic boundaries on those projects adopted in the plan. We do use our transportation system development charges. These are charges that come from development that developers pay. These charges are specifically towards capacity improvements. So you may see on a project, for example, a road and a road widening, you would see 18% for SDCs. They calculate per road and per project what the additional capacity is gained out of that project by that project, and you can use SDC monies for that. You have to find other funding for the remainder of those costs, so you have to leverage that money. And then last but not least, road fund. We do use our road fund to some capital projects. I would say predominantly they're out in the rural area. Although it says 5%, I think the single biggest annual allocation of road fund we've ever had was maybe a commitment of $1 million.
It's usually matched.
Match money, correct. So let's talk about House Bill 2017, HB 2017 for short. Right now, we are planning on receiving, I think we received around $2 to $3 million this year. By 2025, 26, 27, those monies will increase to approximately 13.5 million, roughly. We have remained committed to the messaging we have had since day one in this discussion that we are using those dollars for maintenance. They are maintaining our assets that we already have. So you'll see these 4 categories. These 4 categories are the areas that Clackamas County, and again, I can only speak for the county itself, are investing those dollars. Primarily, they are in arterial and collector maintenance. Right now, our annual or average paving package, just the paving alone, not storm drainage, not any additional vegetation removal, any of those other amenities or elements, but our paving package runs about $3 million annually on average. When the HB 2017 money gets queued up to be fully funded, we're hoping to increase that paving package to about $8.5 million. Safety, we've directed about an additional $1.5 million to safety projects and or improvements. These are turn lanes, these are signal improvements, signal enhancements, signage. ADA improvements. I'm not sure if you've seen a lot of the news recently, especially with the city of Portland. There's a lot of concern about out-of-date or ADA improvements that are non-compliant with current standards. We've directed an additional $500,000 towards that use, or to facilitate that change and or improvement. Last but not least, we did direct about $100,000 of those funds, or projecting about $100,000 of those funds to be used for bike and ped improvements as well. Having said that, and honoring the fact that it was a great addition, there are still things that need to be resolved or need to be addressed. And we're just going to share this list with you. These are what from the county's perspective, those unfunded needs are. Capital construction to facilitate congestion relief. We'll talk about that in more detail. Local road maintenance. I will be open and honest with all of you, as I always am. We do not have a local road maintenance program. We spend our money on arterials and collectors. We spend them on the roads where you have the most amount of traffic, the most return for that investment. We may do a local road not very often, but those are local roads that are associated with larger scale projects that are in a failing state of condition, but they are very minor in nature. Safety improvements. We have a lot of safety improvements in and throughout the county. It's one of the nuances of going from kind of a rural community to an urban community. A lot of changes and improvements are needed there. We have plans for multi-use paths, bike paths, sidewalks, and then last but not least, this is specific to Clackamas County as a whole. We have a lovely transportation maintenance department that is full of a number of great people that do great work that happens to be located in a floodplain. And so that is a concern when we have disasters, we need their services. And they are one of our primary initial responders to a lot of those concerns. So these are what our needs are, and we're just sharing that. I want to talk briefly, we've talked about these funding sources. I want to talk briefly about what those look like. This is a lovely graphic. A couple things I want to draw your attention to, one of which is notice who the providers are for these funds. You'll see the federal dollars, state dollars, metro or regional dollars, state, local SDC charges up top, and then we have local urban renewal, which is going away. Note that on a number of those, the majority of those that are specific to long-term capital improvement plans, they are grants. So basically, our job is to align our projects to the extent feasible towards the grant criteria or the values of other entities, either at metro or at the state level. So this answers the question you may be asking yourself when you see a capital project saying, why are they improving that road when they should improve this road? We're improving that road because it may have met a criteria where we were able to secure funds when we were unable to secure funds on this road over here for capital improvement. A lot of that plays into that decision making. We try to be as strategic as possible and leverage county money to obviously get regional and state money as well. We talked briefly about the limitations on system development charges. They rarely can fund 100% of a capital project. We talked about the fact that urban renewal is going away. We do not have and the limits to that tool. So let's talk about, this little gray box over here to the left, locally funded. We do not have any kind of local funding tool, which is interesting because this thing is awesome. I love this clicker. There we go. This is an interesting graphic. So we're sharing with you some information about Washington County, Multnomah County, and Clackamas County. Let's start with the fact there's 3 counties. That's pretty simple. Let's move to the fact that, let's look at road miles. Washington County, about 1,300 miles. Multnomah County, about 230 miles. Clackamas County, congratulations, we're taking the lead at about 1,400 plus miles of roadway. You'll see to the right are all the various transportation funding tools that are disposed to those counties. Washington County leads the pack. Washington County has local gas tax, a road district, local property tax, which is we no longer can implement due to Measure 5 and Measure 50. And they also have a recently adopted vehicle registration, or enacted vehicle registration fee. Totality of those funds on a yearly basis equates to almost $48.9 million of locally controlled money they are able to direct and leverage. Multnomah County, they have a local gas tax and a vehicle registration fee, which totals a little bit over almost $18 million annually. And then we've got our red circle down here that basically says no local funding. No local funding source. I think your analogy was get off the couch. We got off the couch again and engaged in a dialogue with businesses. And we're having a discussion with them about what they thought about this information. You can see from the list of the 29 businesses that are listed up here today, and the good work of Shelley Perini over here to our left, and thank you so much for helping us with that engagement. We appreciate your help. We're able to have a dialogue and discussion with these interested parties and representatives from these agencies to kind of get their feeling and or thoughts about the information we're sharing with you today. We talked about transportation priorities. We talked about the unmet needs, related concerns, talk about interest in local control, as you can see, and their thoughts about the vehicle registration fee. Here's what they supported. Remember, we had a list of like 7 or 8 unmet needs that were up there. These were the needs that were supported by the discussions with these groups. Congestion relief projects. These are capital projects to facilitate congestion relief. Local road program resonated. There was an interest in development of some level or some scale of a local road improvement program. These are the roads that are near our residential uses and our residential facilities. More safety projects. How do we increase the safety funding? They were interested in a concept that we put forward, and that concept originally, it was interesting, the concept we originally put forward was a strategic reserve fund, and they provided some great feedback, which is, why not a strategic investment fund? And this is basically a fund that we could look to partner with cities to do jointly beneficial projects that may be at or near or around county and or city boundaries, or city and city boundaries that maybe have a benefit. And they supported the idea of a vehicle registration fee. They also shared these comments. You can see a number of them around don't spend a lot of time talking about it. We basically want shovel-ready projects. We're looking at 3 to 5 year windows for these projects. Needs to be some clarity about what those projects may look like, obviously. They're looking for opportunities to partner. And last but not least, there's a caveat to all this, which is those dollars need to be spent within Clackamas County. All reasoned requests. We talked to city staff. Obviously, so the vehicle registration fee, by statute, has a requirement that we split those dollars, whatever dollars are gained through that revenue source within the county, is split on a 60-40 basis. 60% to the county, 40% to the cities. And then from the cities, it's split by population. And we're going to show you kind of a revenue discussion and what that looks like for Oregon City up here in a second. So we thought it was important to get a better handle before we went out to the community and really engage them on what the cities would be using these monies for. Mike Besner led that effort, went out, spoke to, I think, every city with the exception like 3 or 4 or 5, something like that, of the 16 that we have, more some of the smaller cities. The focus they had was basically those 3 categories: capital projects, paving and general maintenance, sidewalks and or ADA curb ramps were their desires on how they would use those dollars. We talked to C4. This is the Clackamas County Coordinating Committee. There were 4 questions that were basically posed to that group. First was, as you can read up here, should we move forward with a VRF adopted by the Board of County Commissioners? The response was yes. That's great. What's the rate? A lot of discussion around what that rate should be. Washington County is $30. We had talked at one time about $20. From some of the studies and listening exercises we've had to date, there wasn't a lot of support for obviously the very low amounts, because what's the return on that investment? Why go through all this these steps if you're not going to get something that's going to help with the problem? And obviously, as you can imagine, there was a lot of pushback on the very high numbers that we were looking at. I believe the maximum VRF is $56. $56 that we can implement. So obviously, there were concerns on both sides of that spectrum. That sweet spot was somewhere around $30. A little bit more than 20. So C4 recommended a $30 per year vehicle registration fee. They love the idea about the strategic investment zone, or fund, pardon me, and what that might look like. And if yes, how much? How much? How much the set aside that was agreed upon? We put forward 2 different options with different percentages, and it was agreed upon that a 10% set aside for that fund out of the county's portion would be a reasoned number to put forward to partner with the cities on projects. This gives you kind of an idea about when we talk about a $30 VRF, what it looks like and the revenues that would be distributed to the various cities in and around our county and community. You can see, obviously, it goes by population. So like Oswego, Oregon City are pretty close up there. Oregon City is about $691,000. You can see just some interesting topics to discuss. Damascus is no longer, obviously, the formation of Damascus is no longer there. We would be using those dollars within the area formerly known as Damascus. You can see we have some smaller cities down here. I think the most important city I love to point out is Portland, because they get a whopping $15,000. There are small portions of the Portland metropolitan region, or the city, that obviously extend south into Clackamas County. You can see the county up there at $6.7 million. That does not include the 10% set aside for the VRF, which we'll discuss here in one moment. Or VRF. For
vehicle registration assumptions based on those populations?
Yes, yes, and we'll talk, yep. Yes, I think, there's our mic.
I just want to have a quick question while you're here, because vehicle registration fees, I happen to be a veteran. I have one car that does not pay vehicle registration fees. What happens there?
You're the second time I've got that question. And we have a slide for you. Yeah, we have a slide for you. Yeah. That's a great question, by the way. Strategic Investment Fund, what is it? It's an opportunity for local partnerships. It's an opportunity to partner with our cities, between our cities. Total fund amount is a little over about 1.1 to $1.2 million. That's what we're estimating for that fund. As you can see, that is more, well, you can't see it now. I guess I can go back. I don't want to. As you can see, that's more than any other city that would be given in any given year. There were two areas that we primarily looked at to kind of focus these dollars towards, and that was congestion relief or capital improvements. $1 million is not going to do a lot. So it's almost an opportunity or a leveraging discussion about when an opportunity comes forward. We're assuming that if it was a capital project, it would be every 2 to 5 years, give or take. The initial focus is essentially going to be this maintenance and road transfers, which we'll talk about. Congestion relief, like I said, every 2 to 5 years. These decisions would be made and vetted through the Clackamas County Coordinating Committee, C4. There could be projects that could be brought up. C4 would, and the collective of C4 would make that recommendation. Obviously, there would need to be some partnerships and or priorities set by C4 and how they evaluate those particular projects. This would be essentially an annual ask for clarification from C4, how they would like to direct those dollars. I'm assuming somewhere around December or January, so when we queue up for our budgeting process that starts in February, those dollars would be set aside and we'd have direction on a project. Next is road maintenance and transfers. We've got, I'm not sure if you noticed in the slide some time ago, we've got 40 plus miles of county roadway that are within cities. It creates a tension. And it creates a tension, I'm looking at Tony right now, creates a tension that, creates a tension around development. Because in all honesty, when we we have a county road within the city, we do not develop it to city standards. That would give essentially our transportation maintenance folks 16 different standards to possibly develop or design a road to and have to maintain it. It's a little bit too much. So the thought is, how do we facilitate a dialogue around two things? One, getting those roads back to the cities, because there's a amount owed for that process, because they have to be back to a certain level of service and a certain quality before they're transferred back to the road. Unless the city wants to come forward and take all the poor condition roads. I don't see anybody shaking their head, no, okay. Mike's shaking his head proper, yeah. And there's a financial discussion around that, about what the costs are to get those roads up to a certain quality before they're returned. And then there's the benefit of the fact that once the city has control of the road, they can require and or exact city design standards on that road to what I call urbanize the road. There's a benefit on the county side because we get rid of the long-term liability and costs associated with maintaining that road as well. There's interest from city staff, there's interest from elected officials from the cities to facilitate that program and move it forward. If you think about that process and the dollars, I think we've estimated it would take 7 to 10 years based on the number of roads and the revenue that we have to really get that project in and moving and get all those roads transferred. That's assuming we don't fund any capital projects in between there.
How many miles is that?
There's 40 plus miles of county roads in the cities. Yep.
How much of that is in Oregon City?
No, West Lynn was 0. I'm up.
8 to 10.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, 8 to 10 miles. Mm-hmm. No, thank you. Obviously, when we facilitate the road transfer, they're all subject to board approval. We've been actively trying to do this in the past. We're looking for this pot of money to kind of facilitate that and invigorate that discussion. I also like the fact that it comes through C4, because C4 is basically where a pool of projects can be put forward. C4 can vet those projects, can direct staff on how they like to use those funds. So let's talk about Clackamas County. So that leaves about $5.5 roughly $1 million left that would be deducted to the county. And the discussion we've had to date is how would we use those funds? And obviously, we have elected to remain consistent with the messaging and the feedback we've got from the community. There are these are all the needs we talked about before in that same list. You can see arterials and collector maintenance, we're using House Bill 2017 money for that. Multi-use sidewalks, HB 2017, ADA, HB 2017. We would be directing all of our VRF money towards 3 specific areas and/or silos, one of which is safety. We'd like to increase our safety budget that we have for safety projects in and around the county. We would develop our local road program, where we would actually be maintaining local roads. That would be in the neighborhood of a little over $1 million a year. We would direct into a paving package for local roads. In addition, we'd be looking at a capital construction package. We'd be looking at about $3.5 to $4 million a year. We can invest in a capital development of a capital package to move forward our transportation system plan needs. I want to give you an idea real quick. So right now, the way we've developed our current transportation system plan and our capital improvement plan, we only have funding to do what we call we took a very meaningful look at that plan this last time during development, and only set aside what we call Tier 1 projects within our Tier 1 category. Our first projects are only projects we reasonably thought would be funded. We only have money to do about 15%, or dedicated funding sources that we think we might be able to get from other individuals, but money for only about 15% of that system plan that needs to be implemented. That leaves about 85% of those projects that need to be built unfunded at this particular point in time. The relocation of the transportation maintenance facility, that's still on there, still to be determined. Hey, here's your slide. Impacts to our motorists. It'd be $30 per year per vehicle. Paid every other year when you register. Not applicable to one-time permanent vehicle registrations, which is where that category for veterans falls into. Yep. We have a lot of questions about what it includes. Does it include my ATV that I ride off on the farm? No, it doesn't. Basically motorcycles, cars, pickup trucks, vans, and other passenger vehicles. Does it include unregistered farm equipment, or does it include heavy trucks? We have a lot of questions about heavy trucks. They're obviously paying the weight mile tax. They would not pay this. Our next steps. We've got 2 more engagement sessions with the business community. November 1st, Estacada City Hall. We had the pleasure of heading down to Estacada and having a discussion with them and their community. We have another one on November 13th. Thank you, Clackamas Community College. They've opened up their Harmony campus to have a presentation up there. We are currently working on scheduling 2 to 4 community engagement sessions in and around the county. We're working with our citizen planning organizations to do that, to gain to broaden the understanding and to share the good messaging around this effort and answer any questions they may have. We're obviously coordinating with our C4 committee. November, we'll be looking to give them, I believe, a brief update, and December. And then obviously continue discussions with our Board of County Commissioners on when or if they'd like to implement this VRF. That ends my presentation. Oh, if there's any questions, I believe we have a mic.
I'm sorry,
in the back.
and this is not, I'm not trying to be petty or anything, but
Yeah.
I was out with somebody else who lives in the county, and we drove up 213 and turned on, and there's a ADA type corner there, and there are no sidewalks. It's nothing but dirt on either side. So the question is why spend money? I mean, if there was sidewalks and stuff like that, but you couldn't, if you got up on that thing, you wouldn't be able to go anywhere. Just curious, is that a requirement or?
Do you want to take that?
Tough question, sorry about that.
Well, no, I guess while he gets the mic, I mean, a couple things you have to know about ADA. We exact improvements, and it depends on what some of those improvements are through development, and so the scope and scale of where that development is impacting could limit the extension of those sidewalks. I'm assuming that's how that particular intersection was built. If they build an intersection, though, improvements, they are required to put ADA, obviously, enhancements associated with that. Even if there's no, correct.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep. No, but I love the question, because I'm going to expand on it a little bit. Know the fact that if we touch any road, if we do an overlay, anything to that extent, on any road in Clackamas County, we have to upgrade any out-of-compliance ADA elements on that road. Doesn't sound like much, right? Curb cut here, curb cut there. What's our per cost? I think we're estimating 20,000.
It could get up that high. It's between 10 and 20,000 bucks per usually, when you include the whole thing, design, survey, construction, inspection.
Per ramp.
Per ramp.
Those are the costs associated. And then, and the dialogue on the average of that is around, it's not just the ramp we're talking about, it's the nuances of where the signal pole is located, the clearance and the reachability, how do you reach it? Do they have to be relocated, redesigned, all the conduit? I mean, I'm so you know it's not 10,000 bucks for concrete. Just making sure that's clear.
Well, one real quick thing to add about the ADA stuff is the state of Oregon got sued and last December settled the lawsuit. And they have to fix every single ramp on every state highway in the entire state within, I think, 12 to 15 years. That was their settlement. City of Portland also got sued. They just had a settlement. They're going to be replacing, I think, about 1,500 ramps a year for the next, probably same time period. So enforcement of the ADA, frankly, was lax for a long time. And these groups finally got tired of it, and they filed several lawsuits. Ben was a victim of one too. So, well, it's important because it is eating into our bottom line as we fix them. Yeah.
So Dan, I was curious, because we did have a presentation earlier on the gas tax and what those funds were going to be utilized for. Is there any deviations, any changes to how those funds would have been earmarked if that would have been approved by the voters as compared to the vehicle registration?
The commitment and that's why we honored that commitment in that discussion. The commitment originally was for maintenance purposes only. We could have redirect some of that HB 2017 money to some of the capital needs that are out there, but to remain consistent with that messaging and the feedback we got from the community and the needs that we have, we've directed that initial HB 2017 money towards the same exact improvements that were called out in that gas tax exercise on where our need was. Again, it's the discussion around why build more assets if I don't have money to maintain the current assets that I have. And that was that.
Were the revenue amounts similar as to what the gas tax would have generated versus the $30?
No.
This is a lot.
That's a
House Bill 2017 is, in the end, when it's fully implemented, again, it's ramping up over 10 years or so. It's going to be more. Right now it's less, but it's going to keep ramping up, and eventually it'll be more, which is why you also saw we're actually going to pave a little more than we thought. We're adding more money for the ramps. We're adding more safety projects, which were things that were not part of the original gas tax discussion. So as that money ramps up, we'll be able to add these other elements.
Another discussion around that is when we did that original outreach, and I don't want to get too detailed and technical here, but we've changed the way that we measure the condition of our road based on, to gain some consistency around the region. So you may hear a discussion around PCI, PQI, what that means. The measurement we are using now is more of a visual assessment because it's what our voting public sees on a road. Is it as thorough as we used to do? No. But obviously it reduced some of the need that we had when you had a more thorough assessment of that road section to begin with. But those are interesting terms that have changed since that last exercise.
Hi, Dan.
How's it going, Dan?
A comment and then a question. Great presentation, very informative, and I love the comparison slide between the counties. It just shows how revealing it is to us that we need to do something. And even cars that don't run on gas pay vehicle registration fees, so I like that. My question was, urban renewal is going away 33% on that one slide, so it looks like a pretty big number. Does this make that up, or are you depending upon the increase in 217 to help fill that gap, if that makes sense?
It does. That revenue, the revenue as a whole will never meet that 33% gap that we have now. No. But it does give you, I mean, two things that we'll do on the capital side. One, it gives us flexibility to move projects forward that have the values of our citizens in Clackamas County, which we can't necessarily do when urban renewal is so geographically contained. Correct. But it gives us a capital construction program about $3.5 to $4 million a year, which in all honesty, we're guessing and assuming right now that most of that's probably going to be rural, expended on the rural areas of our county, not the urban areas, because we have funding sources and or grants we can try to secure for our urban area needs. It's just tough to get grant money for capital projects out in the rural area. So we've taken a look at our transportation system plan. I think we've got a list there of what those projects may look like. They're everywhere from Stafford, outside of Oregon City. I think Redland Road's on there. There's a variety. Don't read the list. They're all over the place. But we're thinking most of that money will go to the rural versus the urban. Yeah, the question up here was around what that road. Yes, it'd be widening. It'd be turn lanes for. I mean, we have we have a very public process that vetted our transportation system plan, and with that public process, we have specific projects that come out of that. It would be doing those capital projects. So it'd be turn lanes, lane widths, adding lanes, things of that nature.
Not a lot of adding lanes, just to keep expectations, because we don't have a lot of need for that, but a lot of adding turn lanes.
Yeah.
And shoulder.
Over here.
I was just curious, are you concerned at all about too much, too fast when the state just increased vehicle registration fees? We've just renewed 3 cars in our home, and it went from $83 to well over $100. Now our commercial vehicle came up, it jumped significantly. So then you add this, and so maybe for 1 car in a household, it's not that big a deal, but when you start doing multiple cars, it adds up quickly.
That's a great question. It was funny. So I'm 7 months on this job, 8 months on this job, and part of the interview process was what keeps you up at night. My answer to that question was the ability to make sure that our citizens can see this HB 2017 money that's coming in on the streets. How do we get the improvements on the streets so they can see the money is going directly to the roads? That was one of my top 3. I asked the same question when we were developing this on whether or not programmatically is it possible? And it is possible, and it is needed. The problem that you have on the capital side, most of our we don't have a local capital source of money. So it gets back to that urban-rural dialogue, and it's difficult for us to really balance that out just because of the availability of sources to fund those kinds of projects.
Over here.
Yeah, I'm a native Oregonian, lived in California and worked down there for 25 years, where they now, and for some time, have taxed income, property, sales tax, vehicle registration fees, and they require that being paid every year. The list of tax things goes endless, and yet their roads are some of the worst around, and they've got a huge bureaucracy. This feels a little bit to me like they'd be opening that door, where you start to say, well, okay, we're going to tax a little bit here, or apply fees, so, those 2 words are synonymous, and then, come around for the next thing. And it's, my concern and question really is, how do we prevent this from opening the door that opens more and more taxes and makes us still have poor services, poor roads?
So I'm going to distill that down to accountability for those dollars, if I could be so bold as to do that. The dialogue and the business practice that we've implemented internally around that is to make sure when we have funds which we call or consider restricted funds, those are funds that are directly purposed for certain uses, we actually call those funds and dedicate those funds within certain fund lines or areas. I'm not sure if you've seen the county's website or you've heard of Performance Clackamas. It's something that our Board of County Commissioners support. It's a dialogue around measurables. We actually have to provide measurable items of measurement and or growth and or gain as they relate to our budget. We would have specific measurables around these dollars that would be set aside in a specific fund for that specific use to make sure we are keeping the overhead costs for those dollars low as possible, and spending those dollars to improve the roads. The taxing discussion is a different discussion. I mean, I think that to own that dialogue. I mean, there's a lot of things that are hitting the ballot. You've got discussion right now about Metro and the 2018 housing dialogue and the affordable housing bond. You've got discussions around future bonds. You are all very well aware of the discussion around tolling and around I-205. My concern is the fact that for the citizens of Clackamas County, we have no local funding source that aligns with our local values on how we want our roads to look like and how we want to improve them. I cannot look you in the eye and say, I can go fix your road or do your capital project next year if I can't find a grant or some other way to pay for it. With this funding source, if you had a project that came to light, urban or rural, there was public support for it and a need for that project, we as Clackamas County would be able to stand up and collectively go do that project. We cannot do that right now. That does not happen. I hear dialogue, and we've had discussions around Washington County and I do it with my kids. I drive out to Washington County, and there's a roundabout in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, what is that? Now, you think about it, it's proactive and it's great because they're out there building infrastructure to support business and growth. They're ahead of the game in that. And their costs are less because it's greenfield road construction versus building roads in the built environment. We don't have that. We don't have those tools. We are not Washington County. You saw from the slide up there on the revenue they're getting. That is locally controlled revenue. They share it with their cities. They work with their cities. We do not have those tools at our disposal. And I didn't answer all your question, I'm sorry, but I'd love to talk to you more in the back if we could.
I have a question. It's a little bit of a variant on the previous gentleman's question, but I'm out there on the campaign trail. I talk with a lot of business owners, and they're always looking for ways of saving costs and reinvesting in their business. Instead of looking outward to raise their prices for their product and services, they look inward to basically how they can save money and save costs. So my question is basically, has the county done that in terms of finding ways with existing funding on how they can save costs to pay for some of the projects that you're referring to?
Yes, I'll give you an example. Great example. You have to have a concern and a discussion around the use of federal money. Which is a great dialogue in this discussion because the use of, we have made the conscious decision that when we go forward, we have to know the fact that if we try to use federal dollars, what's our escalator on that? 20? That's a 20% increase in just project cost if we look to go out for those kind of funds. So we try to be selective in how we leverage our dollars internally. So we try to leverage our internal county public dollars to get other funding, common sense. We do it everybody does it every day. But we also make conscious decisions around the cost of looking for other funds. That's just an example about how we do business. We are proactive in trying to keep our overhead costs down. There are a variety of tools, and the nuance, though, is also looking at other creative funding sources. There aren't a lot out there. We go back to continuing the discussion. We've been having this dialogue for 20 years. I haven't been around for that entire dialogue, but it's a feeling and it's a choice by the citizens what their thoughts are and how they feel about it. So thank you for the question. Oh, yeah.
Can I just add one thing to the answer? Oh, sure. So we have actually cut a lot through the years. As Dan referred to it, jaws of death before, but without the graphic, doesn't really explain it. Our costs were going up faster than our revenue was coming in. So we cut staff in all departments over the last 10 years. Our road department probably lost 10 to 20 people. Our engineering department probably lost 3 to 5. And so we already made those cuts. And still we're able to deliver what I think are pretty decent services. And now we're starting with this money, starting to see, okay, now we can bring back maybe and get back to even what we were doing before. So, yeah. Just thanks.
The chair would like me to make sure one statement's very clear. We cannot use your property taxes on the maintenance of roads or capital construction. That seems to be a concern and a lack of clarity around that topic. Not sure it relates much to your question, but just
I'm just addressing cost savings, basically.
correct. Yep. The dialogue also is the fact, during the downturn, when we lose 50% of our building department, I mean, it was a cut throughout the totality, though, as with all the private side as well.
The longer, the longer I wait to ask a question, the more information I get from the other questioners to ask even more questions.
I see you have a list.
Oh, yeah. These are just talking points. These are not fully fleshed out. Yeah, Dan, one of the things, and thank Chair Bernard for clearing up, because I was thinking about the urban renewal districts that the county has that are going to be closing. Theoretically, when those districts close, the property tax is going to significantly increase. But your point, Mr. Chair, is that that money will not be able to be used for road maintenance. Perhaps there's some other way that that property tax could defer other expenditures that could be applied to road maintenance. Just the thought that, you know, we support urban renewal, but there's got to be a plus side to it, and that when that district closes, there's supposed to be a lot more money to work with. Secondly, there was a comment about taxes and fees being equal, and they aren't. They come from different sources. Not everybody pays the same taxes, but everybody would pay a fee. And adding on to that, there's the question of, I imagine every vehicle, although I'm not talking about your tractors off the side there, so the fire trucks are going to have to pay that. What about TriMet? Is TriMet going to pay for their registration fees? What about emergency vehicles, ambulances, and so on? Everybody that has a license plate, I assume, is going to have to pay that fee. It would be
Yeah.
well, not an ambulance, of course, wouldn't be a heavy truck. Yeah, so I'm just wondering how broadly that can be spread. About 10 years ago, maybe a little more, Oregon City, your county seat, really, I thought, blazed the trail in so far as how we maintain our roads. And information that I get from other people that visit this fair city say that we have the best roads in all of Clackamas County. And I think that it's very carefully planned why we do. We have a fee, a pavement maintenance utility fee that we instigated about 10 years ago that had several factors to it. It ramped up, it was a cute choice of words, it ramped up insofar as it wasn't the same fee at the beginning, but we knew what the cap was going to be, and we have increased that. There was a whole series of consultants and a lot of community outreach as the county has done before the decision was made. There was also an agreement with the Public Works Department that they would provide an annual report as to where that money was going to be spent. I assume there'll be something like that in place for the county so that we know where that money is being spent. It was not voted on. The PMUF, the Pavement Maintenance Utility Fee, was not voted on because you don't have to vote on fees. This vehicle registration fee does not have to be voted on. The commission can do that anytime they want. You've been talking about this for 20 years. 5 years ago, Chair Bernard remembers I came up and I was talking with them at a town hall, and I was giving, what was his name then? How quickly we forget. John Ludlow, yes, thank you very much. And I challenged him. I said, you have the authority to do this. You have the need. It's clearly defined. We need this for our citizens' welfare and safety. Why don't you just do it? I understand that there was an election at the time. It's not popular to create fees, but there's no election now. So the question that I would ask, perhaps not to you, but to the board, just do it. Just do it.
That was kind of more of a statement than a question.
Oh, okay. Why don't you just do it?
I noticed that expenditures are being made for bicycles. Are they not included in the vehicle registration to help pay for that, offset that?
Come on up, Deidre. You haven't, here. I'm going to go sit down now.
Oh, right. So the money that we've included in our program to cover the bike and ped actually is a requirement of state law. So state law requires that you spend 1% minimum of your state highway fund receipts on bike ped. So we made the assumption that as we started collecting more vehicle registration fees, we would be taking 1% of that and also directing it toward the bike ped program. Does that help?
Yeah, and in House Bill 2017, there is a tax when you buy a bike. Yeah.
And a question, Dan, and we'll get on over to you, Tim. I remember when we had the PowerPoint presentation on the gas tax, one of the most important slides that I saw showed how much it costs to maintain a road on a regular basis versus how much it would cost if you let that road go without the proper type of maintenance that was needed, to finally got to the point where you're just tearing the whole thing out. And it was, the costs were so disproportionate. And I'm just wondering, because you do have the authority to go ahead and impose this fee, it does not go to a vote of the people. It may be good to just refresh in everyone's minds how much it would cost if you didn't impose that fee at a later date when they wanted to go back and fix those roads. And then my second question is, the 40% that the cities get as mandated, the cities have a lot more flexibility as to how they spend those funds within the dedicated right-of-way, I believe.
We don't, they have autonomous discussion as long as it goes to road purposes. They can spend that money however they see fit. It's mostly around what that city's particular value structure may be, and what they need for their community. Because we did hear we heard some folks, I think we heard a couple areas that were primarily bike ped, some were mostly maintenance, some were capital. I think you saw the cities that were making more money based on their population. The capital need was a little bit more possible and viable. Some of those dollar amounts don't really allow for that. In regards to, and I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, we just had this, yeah.
So,
Yeah, you need your own mic. Here, take one. No, don't come out.
So yes, thank you for bringing that up. The cost to fix a road changes greatly depending on the condition of the road. So if all we have to do is chip seal, which is basically just a surface coating to protect water from getting into the road and making the base worse, that's one, and a slurry seal, different kinds of seals, and I know Oregon City does a lot of that. That's our base, that's our least expensive, and if the road's already in good condition, we can do that. For roads starting to not be in such great condition, then we have to overlay it. We're talking about a few orders of magnitude more expensive. But the worst is when we don't do anything, and the road now, the road base, so the rock under the road is gone, and you got tons of cracks and potholes. There's nothing we could do to that road other than completely rebuild it. We can't just pave over it because it'll be crap again in a year, technical term. So
you know you're being recorded right now, right?
I'm cool with that. So it could be 10 times as much money. And so road reconstructions are very, very expensive, and we want to avoid them. And not to mention disruptive. They'll take a lot longer, and the roads will be closed for a while. So yeah, the cost of waiting is pretty extreme.
Magnitude, wasn't it like 10?
Yeah, 10. It could be 10 times more money.
Yeah, I'm just going to do an order of magnitude discussion around that, but it's about 10 times what that given cost may be. Yeah.
I was encouraged to see your bike multi-use path as a line item over there. And one of the neat things or nice things is to get bikes off of roads. And I'm really appreciative of the new trolley trail bike path. That's tremendous. Is there any plans to go ahead and put any bike path throughout Clackamas County or anywhere, like in the Canby area with the former Molalla trunk line, rails to trail?
It's actually been a lot of talk about that in particular thing, and Canby actually, I think, has been doing work on it. One thing we cannot do is spend road fund outside road right-of-way. So we would not be able to spend any of this money on a standalone multi-use trail like the one you're talking about, like the trolley trail, for example, because much of it's not in road right-of-way. Some of it is. So that's a limitation on state highway fund. But in our TSP, the county's transportation system plan, does have some multi-use paths in there. I don't off the top of my head remember what they all are, but I know that we have no way to pay for them. with existing funding. But I know the one in particular you're talking about that the city of Canby has been looking into.
To the point about safety, though, because it comes down to part of that discussion and that question was around safe modes of transportation for non-vehicle individuals, so bikes, cyclists, whatever it might be. We are looking at other types of treatments to roads. In fact, we just did our first cycle track design for a road, which is basically a raised area for the bikes. They're at a different grade. By grade, it's not 3 or 4 feet. I mean, we're like a couple inches up, but it provides a safer environment for the traveling public. So we're looking at ideas around that that go into concerns about design.
Yeah, and the other thing that a lot of these congestion projects would have, when we're adding turn lanes or we're widening the shoulders, which is a huge safety element, those shoulders would then be wide enough to be the equivalent of a bike lane, where in the rural area, we really don't have that anywhere currently.
Back over here.
Yeah, so a question, the recent paving job on Maple Lane Road, beautiful pavement, and my 65 Mustang loves to travel on that with its new suspension and, you know, tight cornering and that kind of thing. But what does the county do for lessons learned and also for best practices? Because the fault of that road is that the small gravel or on the side of the road ended up being a magnet for people to drive in that and kick up all those gravel. And then you've got the cost of change order for somebody to come in and put either bigger pieces of concrete in or things like that. So what is the county going to do for keeping track of lessons learned like that and applying it to future projects, and also looking at things and saying what best practices, what has been done always well, and make sure that that continues to go forward?
So you're talking about the rock that was put in on the shoulder that was kind of loose?
Yeah, it gets kicked up all the time.
Yep. So we already know not to do that. But yes, we do I could talk about that one in particular in a second, but we debrief on all our projects as teams, and we talk about the lessons learned. And we've done many other gravel shoulders throughout the county much better than that one. And there's an issue on the rock, and it's something that, yeah, we're gonna have to work on a little harder. But that was an unusual one. Throughout the county, our gravel shoulders, in the rural areas, we compact them pretty well. We usually use slightly larger rock than they used on Maple Lane. That one didn't turn out the way we would prefer, and it was unusual. And yes, we're going to be committed to making sure that in future projects that we don't do the shoulders that way again. But I appreciate the comment. Now, one other thing, by the way, that we did on Maple Lane is we've been putting the reflectors in the middle of the road. People probably notice that stuff, and we've recessed them. And the reason we recess them is so when we do our snow plowing, we don't rip them all to shreds. So that one came out great. The striping came out great, and the recessed buttons came out great. But that's something else you'll be seeing on the rural roads just outside the cities also, is more of those recessed reflectors in the middle. So at night, especially in the rain, you'll be able to see where you're going. Yeah, we had a water, or we didn't.
Did you used to enjoy it?
Yeah. We had to rip out.
No, hang on. No weed.
Yeah, I know. I think Clackamas River Water had a water line in it the other day that burst, and right under our brand new, beautiful pavement. Yeah.
It's sad. Our Randy Harmon, our transportation maintenance official, is a little upset about that.
So I'm going to turn it over for a quick update from John Lewis, the Oregon City Public Works Director, to kind of just share with our members here today, if this goes into effect, how Oregon City might utilize part of that, close to $700,000. Yeah, their share would be $700,000.
There's a podium up here.
Thank you for putting me on the spot here. Man, I've been spent hours preparing for this. So, yeah, no, that is a good question, and it's fun to think about too, because this is meaningful funding. We do have a PMUF, or pavement maintenance utility fee. To be honest, that has been very helpful. But things like water lines, we're finding, the first couple of years we were able to pick off all the low-hanging fruit, spread that money around. I think that's something you guys ought to think about too, is to just show the best way you can spend that as you can. But we're getting down to those roadways now that need, like High Street. If you've traveled High Street, we spent months on that road, just taking care of the water, the sewer, the stormwater, fixing that. Those are old facilities. So while the funding is good and has been good, we're starting to get to those tougher projects. So this money will help support that for sure. Those of you that have been, Oregon City's put a lot of effort into public involvement, public education around system development charges, particularly transportation system development charges. So the City Commission recently did a little adjustment to that, and there was a lot of business influence on how we did that, trying to find ways to make it a little bit easier for the business community, and feeling like there was plenty of residential development going on, so maybe trying to load that a little bit more. And I wouldn't say the law allows us to make huge adjustments to that, but they allowed us to make small adjustments to that. And with that, the Commission, I thought, again, boldly adopted new transportation system development charges that pretty much cover our 20-year need that growth is supposed to pay for, right? So lots of times communities adopt transportation system development charges lower than what they need because they feel like that's a way to spur development. In this city, they were thoughtful of that, but they tried their best to fund the full need that will provide growth projects, but there's still a gap. Those transportation system development charges are limited to growth-related projects, and so we may have a roadway that has capacity problems, and a small portion of that is paid through transportation system development charges, but the remainder is paid with some other funds, right? So we have an unfunded project list, or we have projects that have large percentages of project that's not funded. And that's what we intend to use these dollars for, is to try to fill that gap on capacity-related projects, mostly, that's what I have in mind, paired with our pavement maintenance fees, so that if we need to add a right turn lane and can get pavement to go further and to deal with ADA and all the kinds of things that go with that project, we're pairing that. And the thing that I love about the vehicle registration fee is it's not a grant, it's not a federal dollar that's tied to a lot of bureaucracy. If you want to help us with those kinds of things, we have so many programs out there that are great, I guess. They're grant programs, but they're loaded with bureaucracy that, report that. We got grant administrators at Metro, at ODOT, all those other agencies that are loving that program, I guess, but it doesn't necessarily result on black pavement on the ground. So we need help there for sure. But these monies would go towards kind of filling that gap for Oregon City. At least that's my hope. I mean, the commission needs to really kind of help us guide that way too. We're kind of waiting to see if it really happens. If it really happens, then we'll have a much more detailed discussion on specifically where.
John brought up a great point with SDCs. The county has SDCs too, as we showed. And some of the capital projects with that $3.5–4 million a year, we'd be able to leverage that to also use SDCs. So instead of a $3.5 million project, it might be a $6 million project. So the vehicle registration fee could leverage the other money that development is already paying into the pot.
And I want to go back to your question, because that's another great example. We actually, when we adopted our most recent transportation system development charge, we actually got compliments from HBA, which blew my mind because of the great work that you did, Deidre. But one of the things we really are mindful of is the private side can do it cheaper. And so we talked about how do we work with crediting and getting those dollars back on the private side, because they can build those improvements for a cheaper cost. And so let's look at a crediting component of that SDC versus simply collecting the money and then having to leverage it against some other public money, which has more cost in the long term.
One more question. David?
Dan, you listened to C4, the cities, to establish a $30 rate. I would encourage you to listen to Business Voice, and they may want to raise that level, from 30 to something more to make it more significant. Mm-hmm. Especially when you look at the disparity between the three counties and the funding tools that you have. Clackamas County needs to start putting those tools in your kit bag. I don't know if it's palatable, but I believe that there should be some consideration for a hybrid and electric vehicle when it comes to level of licensing fees, the growth of electric bikes and electric scooters should be included to help cover that 1% into bike paths. And I transfer roads to the cities as soon as you could facilitate it.
Give me a hallelujah. No, the VRF, again, to acknowledge that discussion, I think you saw businesses were pressing that discussion on the higher end versus the lower end. It was a discussion around what really resonated and felt comfortable, I think, from a more totality perspective in regards to some of our residential users as well, is how we landed on that $30 through C4. You brought up things that are kind of on our plate to think about as well. That whole scooter thing and all that other stuff, we've actually been talking, we've got to have a discussion with our board about how we either license or get revenue from those and get them back into the system. That's on our to-do list. And yeah, we want to transfer roads. And in all honesty, the cities they've been good partners in that discussion. There's an interest there as well. That was a targeted effort to make sure that where there's mutual benefit was try to achieve that and was partnered together. That's the intent of the exercise.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan, for a very informative presentation.